It's not rumor. These things are happening. The sale of WB is happening.
Yeah. And like it or not, the door has been left open by the commercial response to the project, right? That's the other, like, content positioning or not. If Superman had made Avatar money, he'd be safe.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying, like, there's a level at which you get to call your shots.
What's going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of the Nerd Gen Report. I'm your host, Pablo, and joining me, as always, is Mr. Brian Schultz. DC Roundup, and what a roundup it is. WB sale rumors go crazy. We'll get a bit detailed into that. And this is in connection with the Snyderverse resurrection. This thing just won't. Nick Cage. Okay. Netflix seemingly changing their tune as to what they will be participating in, something that they were, especially the CEO, was not for, is now changing somewhat of their mind as to how they want to approach things going forward, especially if they acquire WB. Will James Gunn get a new contract for on DC? Also, Lantern is delayed, which is quite upsetting. When we were supposed to get that?
It's supposed to be in the first quarter of 2026, and now it's going to be later in 2026.
So let's get started, man, because I want to say something regarding, people saying, hey, you guys are too early with this reset thing. The fact of the matter is, you want to say something, Brian?
I was going to say, I feel like if you watch the sequence of shows, maybe what we didn't communicate in the last reset show was the only reason we're talking about that is because of the merger. We're not talking about it. Had WB not gone up for sale,
this wouldn't be a
this
conversation.
This is not a conversation. Whether you like James Gunn or you don't like James Gunn, this conversation is not relevant. Even with his contract up in 2026, I don't think there would have been any doubt that he would have been gotten a new contract or been extended. And if he wanted to stay, then he would have stayed. The only reason this became a talking point, and it wasn't just because there's that kind of low-grade rumor out there from a couple months ago that he was going to be out. It's just simply Warner Brothers is going to have a new owner. Like, that is a fact. We don't know exactly who yet, but it is a fact. At this time next year, Warner Brothers will be owned by somebody else. And at this time next year, James Gunn would be out of his existing contract. So that's the reason we started talking about reset. Everything we talked up until now has been about should they or shouldn't they. So today we are simply saying, forget the should part. We're just saying, will they? Will, at this time next year, when you and I are taping this show, are we going to be talking about a DCEU that is still run by James Gunn or not?
WB sale rumors go crazy as they reach out to the middle sovereign wealth to get involved in the purchase of WB. Brian, what's the latest on that?
So the preliminary bids are in, right? We've crossed the deadline. There's a second deadline, which is sort of a more binding deadline, but by all accounts, the preliminary deadline, which was set by Warner Brothers itself, came and went with 3 bids, and there's let's call it a wrinkle, in some cases a gigantic one, involved with all 3. And that's what we mean by the rumor mill's gone a little bit crazy. So why don't we start with the Paramount angle, because they've been at the table from the beginning and they're in some ways the catalyst for all of this happening. Mm-hmm. So there are conflicting reports as to whether the Ellison family went to the Middle East to try to obtain additional financing to beef up their bid. But the Middle East sovereign wealth angle won't go away, and it's come up in a couple of contexts, one of which is even more crazy than this one. But the report would simply be that despite Larry Ellison having enough family money to do this himself, he's trying to get an outside backer to basically sweeten his offer and try to get themselves up to, it sounds like they don't want to go all the way to the $75 billion, the $30 a share that David Zaslav is asking for, sounding like they want to get somewhere into the high 20s, and they think that's kind of good enough. And the reason they think that's good enough is the other thing that is now gaining some more steam, which we on this show have been on since the beginning, which is that Paramount reportedly has an inside track in Washington to win, to the point where the latest rumors are indicating that the administration is warning Netflix and Comcast that they will drag them through the regulatory approval mud for years if they were to win this, while Paramount would sail through the approval process. And as we've said to you before, a lot of this actually is not happening in the backyard of DC, but DC will likely become a part of this angle, which is Paramount and Skydance just took over the CBS networks. You can kind of Google what's going on at the CBS networks, but a lot of change, a lot of talking heads who have been very critical of current administration have been pushed out already, and there is a huge movement afoot there to remake the network with a very different political stance. The thought is Warner Brothers owns the CNN family of networks, and that the administration is hell-bent on getting the same Ellison family ownership of those networks and wants to do the same thing globally there. Mm-hmm. I pointed out months ago that the politicization of Superman, inadvertent or intentional, would inevitably lead to that angle becoming a conversation in this process. And when I see this report of like CNN's a focal point after CBS was a focal point, I find it impossible to ignore the fact that Superman became a sort of political talking point over the summer, and that might lead to, Paramount and Skydance's ownership of Warner Brothers involving some conditions with regard to the future of the DCU. So that appears to be gaining some steam, that the Ellison family thinks they don't need to be the high bid because they have the inside track in Washington. And the reason they have the inside track is they are going to change the political landscape of the combined entity once approved. It's a lot there. What are your thoughts on that craziness?
For others involved in wanting to add to their organization, WB, and their IP and the stuff that they have to offer, I mean, you think about how badly do they want it, and do they want to go through the rigors of acquiring it? It sort of puts, why would you want to go through all of that to get this? We're doing fine. I mean, Apple, Amazon, they are putting out good stuff and adding. I think for me, Brian, the biggest prize, obviously, for some may be HBO. For me, it would be DC, right? How badly do you want it? If you sit around at a table with other execs and think about the hurdles that they have to overcome to try to acquire this, is it worth it? I think that's the question, right? I mean, obviously, there's the money. Do they have it? Absolutely. But do they want to go through that other stuff that, years to get it approved? As DC fans, I don't want to wait years, right? I don't want to wait years to see where we go with the DCEU and its characters. If this is drawn out, it's a tough situation for these other entities wanting to acquire WB. The only way that it could possibly work out is that these guys have conversations with the administration about what their plans on doing. You know what I'm saying? It's all about getting chummy. It's all about getting chummy.
Yep.
what can we do for you? What can you do for me? Sort of situation. So it's a tough one. I think it forces these other entities to go that route if they want to go that route. If they don't want to go that route, then I don't see them participating in this sale. But if there's room for it, which I believe that there may be some, questions and conversations that could happen just to see what the temperature's like and what's being asked of us in return.
Yep.
That would be the subject matter surrounding whether or not to pursue this.
Yeah, and I would say, look, I mean, the irony is we've kind of been down this road before in the sense of, well, first off, like even under the prior administration, which challenged a number of mergers across a number of industries, corporations sometimes will take on the headache if they believe in the target and they believe in the long term, because ultimately, the administrations and FTC can block up to a certain point. They can challenge up to a certain point, but you can also ultimately sue them. You can go to court. And a lot of times in court, corporations can still win because ultimately judges see like they can lay out the merits of what they're doing. And that's where you can kind of go against the, hey, we need you to concede this and give us that for us to say yes. Right. So that's where, sometimes it doesn't matter. They're willing to say, look, I'll go through hell because I can get DC at the end of it. That's worth waiting. I can get HBO at the end of it. That's worth waiting 3 years or 2 years to do. Some at times that is the case. The other thing is, I mean, let's not forget, like, it's interesting, like during the first Trump administration, part of the reason we're sitting here and having this conversation is because they kind of did this already. Like Warner Brothers Discovery kind of was created under that regime. Disney, Fox went through, like there was a whole, remember that was a whole different time of like they put together a few conglomerates, then they rejected a few others. So they've kind of done this before. I think it's just a little different climate in terms of, network content, messaging, right? A lot of that has changed relative to when Trump first got in office in 2017 versus how that's perceived today. So I think that's where you made the right point, which is some of the other bidders, it's not that they couldn't pull it off, but it might be a tool to say, like take Comcast as an example, where I had said, look, I mean, they own the NBC networks. God, that's a pretty big strike against them going into this process. But what if like Brian Roberts is a CEO of Comcast says, well, as part of doing this deal, I'm willing to remake NBC the way that CBS was remade. I guarantee that becomes a conversation immediately, right? And that's like that's catnip to what the administration is talking about. So that's where it's like there are certainly concessions and ways to get them on board. At the outset, they're simply threatening, they're kind of they're warning people. These guys at Paramount Skydance already have our ear because Ellison has the president's ear and they're doing the things the way we want them done. So if you want to do things similarly to them, then yeah, we'll entertain your bid. So yeah, a lot of machinations, but I just circle that angle and let's come back to it when we do our James Gunn prediction. We'll circle that angle because if you're telling me that the political stance of your subsidiaries matters that much to the media company involved here, are you seriously going to sit there and tell me it doesn't matter when it comes to DC content? That makes no sense. So you care about it on TV, you care about it on cable, but you suddenly don't care about it when it comes to Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, the Justice League? Come on now. Of course you care about it. You cared about it in the summer before you even knew the merger was happening. That's why we're talking about crazy stuff like this, because it circles back to what does the DCU need to look like down the road to satisfy what seems to be some requirements out of Washington to get a deal done.
So yeah, it's too early, but at the same time, things change very quickly. It's just is what it is, and this sale is happening.
This is also why, remember that thing that came out about like David Ellison wants to leave all the creative people at all the subsidiaries intact. And then you see this story and you're like, well, obviously that's a lie. Obviously, if the criteria is you need to move the entire organization to the to the center or to the right, well, clearly the people who are not with that, who are currently getting airtime or running projects and are not going to be there.
If they don't play ball.
Exactly.
So we're just we're basically just, is it a sight beyond sight sort of situation where we're sort of talking about the future? Yeah, we are talking about the future of what could occur based on the situation that's happening now, and as you said, the requirements needed in order to make something like this happen. And again, and Brian has said it in the past before, history speaks for itself. It isn't always the same, but it often rhymes.
Yep.
And we're in a situation where, as you see things now, will not be the same. Something will change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the past couple of weeks, Brian, we've been getting Superman made $100 billion. Why are we focusing on? Why is this a headline? Superman made $100 million. We made profit. Why? And the movie came out when?
July.
And we're still talking about if it made profit or not. Why?
Or June,
why?
I guess, end of June.
Yeah. So this thing that's occurring now is interesting because, again, I've said it in the past, what James Gunn has done thus far in the DCU doesn't tickle my, the dopamines don't activate too much. You know, it doesn't get me excited for what's coming up next, other than the stuff that's coming out of DCU that doesn't involve too much James Gunn's writing, his directing. There's other people involved. That's why I'm looking forward to this year, 2026, coming up, to see what these movies will be about and how successful it can, and I think possibly will be. The subject matter in terms of James Gunn's direction in his own projects will be a subject that we talk about often on this channel, because there is a difference. You can see it, you can feel it. And if the 2026 roster of Lanterns, Supergirl, which I said is going to probably make more than Superman, Brian thinks otherwise, correct?
Yeah, I don't think it'll quite get there.
Those three projects, man, are going to be huge, and it'll probably be the thing that people look at to decide the future of the DCEU.
So let's bring back the Middle East sovereign wealth angle. So the Ellison family denied that they will be leveraging Middle East sovereign wealth money to finance the bid. They're claiming their final bid is going to be just their own money. And we don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they're saying. However, Middle East sovereign wealth funds have very deep pockets. There is a rumor that they put in a last-minute bid on their own. So Saudi put in a bid on its own for all of WB. Now, that's a whole different kettle of fish, but I would point out the administration and the Saudis are aligned, shall we say. That's a whole political discussion, but you can Google that. And, I think there was an envoy visiting Trump last week, for example. Okay. There is a report that the Saudi bid comes with a condition of their own, if approved, which is the full restoration of the Snyderverse.
Oh my God.
Zack Snyder is already, he already works with the entertainment division of sort of Saudi money. They are a producer on his upcoming UFC film, but apparently he is seen as a must-have. Well, this is all rumor. Like, if you believe there's a bid that is only Saudi money, then you further have to believe that as part of that bid, they are demanding that they be allowed to bring him back and bring back the entire Snyderverse as part of the deal. And Zack Snyder, as we pointed out way back from the first Henry Cavill, Henry is Superman, he has been all over socials with DCEU imagery He was seen liking a post which put a side-by-side of the box office of Man of Steel with James Gunn's Superman, saying Man of Steel made more. Zack Snyder Zack Snyder likes this. Like, he's been all over that type of stuff. There is also noise that he is prepping, or at least making plans to exit Netflix. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit, because it's not as simple as just maybe getting ready for this. But I mean, it seems crazy that we have to talk about this. But apparently there's at least a world where now, depending on who wins Warner Brothers, Zack Snyder and the Snyderverse may get resurrected after all.
I don't know, man. I don't even know I don't even know what to think about if that were to happen. What sort of story are we getting? What
they're saying, we pick up after Zack Snyder's Justice League. It's not him starting over. It's Cavill, Affleck, Momoa, Ezra Miller, Gal Gadot, Ray Fisher. Everyone comes back, and he does Justice League 2 and 3, and he goes forward with all the plans he had for the Deathstroke movie with Manganiello. Like, all that stuff that's the claim of this rumor, that they are demanding as is, he completes the saga of DC exactly as he envisioned it.
I doubt that ever gets made. And if it does, I don't know, Brian. I don't know what to say about something like this. It's like you said all you've said in terms of, and listen, what Zack Snyder did, again, wasn't a universal thing that people accepted.
No. It was a box office disappointment relative
Justice
to
League doesn't make $1 billion.
Batman versus Superman not making $1 billion. Remember, the report was part of the reason. Again, it's all a function of expectation. This is what we talk about. Happiness is a function of your expectations, right? The Chris Nolan produced, Zack Snyder directed Man of Steel was seen as $1 billion lock by the studio in 2013. So yes, it made 670. It made money, technically, but the studio saw it as a disappointment. So they partially panicked and rushed Batman and rushed the Justice League, which led to more disappointment. Again, did BVS make money? Yes, it made money. Was it a disappointment to the studio at $800 million and change? Yes, it absolutely was. Like, that's the facts of the case. It's like, you can have projects that make money that are still seen as failures by the people writing the checks, which then leads to changes. So James Gunn's Superman, did it make I'm kind of skeptical, honestly, of that $100 million profit number. I think that's a little PR spin. I think James Gunn's Superman more accurately broke even, and probably will make its profit mainly through syndication, streaming. It didn't hurt the studio. I don't think it really was a home run for the studio. But again, David Zaslav's expectations for Superman I don't think they were $1 billion. I think they were lower because of the climate of superhero movies. Therefore, he was willing to view it as, okay, we're operational, right? The space station is operational. It's not finished. It's not invincible. We're off and running. That's how he looked at this version of Superman. That's not how WB looked at Man of Steel in 2013. And as I said, I'm a defender of Man of Steel more than you are. I still like Man of Steel, but there's no question, coming off The Dark Knight Rises making over $1 billion, they thought launching a Chris Nolan, Zack Snyder Superman brand was an automatic $1 billion, and it didn't happen.
You and I have to at some point have a conversation about Man of Steel. I think the aura surrounding the Zack Snyder universe for them is big enough to mention, because they know it'll stir up conversation, not necessarily excitement, Brian, but certainly a lot of curiosity as to what's next if something like this were to happen. Will we check it out? Of course. Outside of that, Brian, business move-wise is a risk, obviously, because you further delay the possible future of a DCU where it is as successful as Marvel, because we haven't gotten there yet. We're far from it. And the people who own DC look at Marvel and say, I want that. We have the tools, the characters, we have the universe. We don't have the same problems that Spider-Man has with Marvel and Sony. We have everything. So they're looking at that, and we can have that.
I will say this. As crazy as the rumor is, and I'll give you some firsthand supporting evidence. This combination, theoretical combination of Middle Eastern sovereign wealth money writing Zack Snyder the checks to finish the DCEU, that is actually Zack Snyder's best case scenario, personally. And here's why. Because everything you just said is correct on merit in terms of the way U.S. studios run their business, which is the very simple, they look at the bottom line. And they say, ultimately, projects and sequels get greenlit if they make money. And if they don't make money and they lose money over time, everything gets canceled. That's how that works. That is not how sovereign wealth in that part of the world necessarily thinks of everything. And I say that from firsthand knowledge because I've been there multiple times and I've seen some of what they spend their money on. I remember driving through Saudi and I was shown numerous structures, projects that were lavish, incredibly expensive, made of ridiculous price materials that were left unfinished. And I was like, why weren't they finished? You clearly have the money to finish them. And they're just like, we just lost interest. Like we spent billions and billions and billions. It was like a water plant they had built that was designed to tunnel far underground, under the desert, to reach sources of water so that they could bottle their own water domestically versus having to import bottled water. And they literally built the entire plant. They built the technology to drill, and then they stopped at the 5-yard line and never produced a single bottle of water after spending billions upon billions of dollars to do it. And yet the plant just sits there, like 90% done, and they don't care. So my point is, I'm not convinced that them as owners of the Zack Snyderverse would actually care if his movies made money or not. Which, if you're Zack Snyder, that is absolutely what you want. Because the return of the Snyderverse, here's the 3 things I would predict for the return of the Snyderverse if it happened.
Prediction? Yes, prediction.
Number 1, it will be critically savaged. It was hated at the time. It will be 10 times more hated if it is brought back. I mean, look at Zack Snyder's filmography. Like ever since 300 and Watchmen and his Army of the Dead movies, it's just been a downhill descent. I mean, the despise for what he makes now is palpable. I'm not saying that's all justified, but like the scores are the scores, right? Rebel Moon, on down. Now, his Justice League did get some pretty good marks, like all in for what it was, but BVS was pretty low. Obviously, like the original Justice League, which wasn't all him, was very low. And then, like Rebel Moon, and what was the other one? Sucker Punch. Like some of that stuff was being crushed by critics. So there's no way, I don't think there's any way the critics would somehow come back to the Snyderverse and feel better about it than they did 10 years ago. Number 2 is, it would clearly be incredibly divisive among fans. He has very passionate fans who would be popping corks and declaring victory. But you'd have a lot of people rolling their eyes saying, do we really have to do this again? And go to the well again with some actors we like and some we really don't. And then I think the third thing is it would be disappointing commercially. Again, we are talking about his movies not doing the numbers that were expected at a time when the superhero genre was ascending in the eyes of the movie-going public. Are you seriously going to tell me that now the box office is going to take a quantum leap up globally when interest in superhero movies is clearly declining worldwide? I find that to be highly unlikely. And obviously, this is a guy who doesn't work on $100 million budgets, right? He demands $300 million. And again, if it's Saudi money backing him, he can probably get a blank check for whatever he wants. And they might be okay with him delivering lackluster returns on that just to see it through. But that doesn't mean that all of us are going to be sitting here enjoying the end of the journey with him. But I think this is, honestly, I think this is a remote possibility that all of this happens because of everything we just said, the what ifs. But the fact that it's like even a 0.1 possibility of happening is crazy to me. What would you do if we had to do shows every week about the production and completion of the Snyderverse now?
Man, it would be fun.
Good content,
to talk,
I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's good news for us. It gives us the opportunity to discuss something that we think will ultimately, I think, not reach the desired result. I think the result that Zack Snyder wants is just that he wants to do it. That's it.
Yeah, and do his Dark Knight. He would do his Dark Knight Returns, right?
He just wants to do it. That's it.
It's just candy
Forget
store.
about the fans, whatever it is. I want to do it. We got Rebel Moon, my friends. Had nothing to do with the fans.
That is it. I want to do Star Wars.
I want to do it. That's it. That's all it takes for Zack Snyder to get what he wants. And I'm pretty sure he's a guy that knows how to pitch and get people excited to see his vision. And then we get to see it, and then is Rebel Moon. Atrocity.
Yeah, that's a be careful what you wish for. And by the way, to that point, I mentioned earlier, there is a site focused on sort of nothing but Netflix comings and goings, like kind of a rumor mill for Netflix itself. Mm-hmm. And very quietly this past week, Netflix canceled a couple of Zack Snyder projects. So his anime, like Twilight of the Gods, that's gone.
Whack.
That crime thriller that he wanted to do that he said was like a passion project, supposedly they canceled that too. And so this site said, quote, "It's no secret Zack Snyder's projects did not connect with the way Netflix had hoped. And the director is now working on projects away from the streamer after his Army of the Dead, Rebel Moon, and LAPD crime thriller projects were all put on ice by Netflix for the foreseeable future." Sounds like he's done there. That's the rumor there.
Brian, if we were in the room discussing this prior, we would have told you, don't do this. But we don't know nothing. We don't know nothing. We could have told you this before you spent the 9 figures to do these projects. But I guess you guys have crazy money too because you guys don't care. To me, that's crazy to me. That's crazy to me, young.
I think Netflix learned a little bit. And Zack wasn't the only one in this. Remember, they paid a ton for, what was it, Shonda Rhimes. They paid a ton for like Ryan Murphy. Like they had a whole bunch of these where they were handing out $100 million contracts to individual creators. And I think Netflix, if you notice, has stopped doing that, which kind of tells you like they went through a phase where that's what they thought was the ticket. And then they realized that Zack and other creators, it's kind of like a be careful what you wish for. There are very few people in this world. Actually, Warner Brothers had the same issue with J.J. Abrams. Remember, they gave J.J. Abrams that huge check to like do all this stuff there that like never happened, right? So we're out of that phase now. Like there, you know, it's if I made a list of people who actually can get that kind of deal now, it's Chris Nolan, it's Ryan Coogler, right?
Yes.
Like it's a list of like it's like a list of 5 people who everything they touch has made big money. So this isn't surprising, but it goes to the point of like, if you restore the Snyderverse, you know, with this bid, I think you're going to get exactly what, you know, you expect, right? It's like, be careful what you wish for. All this time, people wanted this. Be careful what you wish for.
And like you said, Brian, not only big money, but big money because the stuff was good.
Yes, exactly. They understand
because
audience.
The people behind it were talented. Not to say that Zack Snyder is not talented. I think he's talented in certain areas.
Yep.
But these guys, Ryan Coogler, Chris Nolan, they have a vision, man, and it's so far they've been able to deliver on almost everything that they've put out. But the only true trend that Chris Nolan, Ryan Coogler, their trends have been going upward in terms of the stuff that they create, the excitement that they create before they even put out anything.
Yeah. That's rare. I mean, Spielberg touched that level in his prime. Like very few. We're talking about the true Hall of Famers can do that.
And I'm sorry, Zack Snyder is not on that list.
No, he's not.
What about this sort of reverse to 180 from Netflix in their approach to theatrical releases, Brian?
So yeah, everyone's got a twist, right? And we talked about this, where Netflix is only bidding for the studio and the streamer, right? So this whole thing, so this is one thing also that disadvantages Netflix in particular, is they would not be acquiring the CNN networks. Remember, I just mentioned the whole political angle on something like that. Well, Netflix is not involved in that. They're only interested in the studio and the streamer. However, as we know, Ted Sarandos and Netflix have been as vocal as possible about, you can go back and find the quote, audiences have spoken. They don't want to see movies on the big screen. They want to watch movies at home. And so you're kind of looking at that saying, well, what are you going to do with all of WB's stuff? Because that's all theatrical stuff. Well, come to find out, Netflix is now making commitments that they will put everything Warner Brothers in the theater as intended, citing there are contractual obligations in these individual projects related to compensation for directors, producers, casts, right, back end, all that sort of stuff. Just Google Scarlett Johansson and Disney. That's all you need to do, because this is exactly what this is talking about, right? When Black Widow never made it the way it was supposed to the theaters, and she wound up suing the pants off them and got a bag and a half for that. This is Netflix saying we don't want a fleet of people doing that.
Yeah.
But it does beg the question, Pablo, of like, once that dam breaks in-house of like you're making these commitments to like send certain movies to theater, what about the others? Like, what about other good stuff that you put straight on the streamer? Is that not going to get a shot now? Like it does feel like it would be a sea change where like once you start doing this, can you really go back? And will we see more? We also saw when you put this together with the Stranger Things announcement, right, of them doing that theatrically for the final season. It just kind of feels like Netflix is being pulled by gravity toward eventizing some of this stuff on the big screen.
And it speaks to what we've been talking about, Brian, about the opportunities that Netflix is missing out on. And it seems like they're be obligated to test it even further if they were to acquire WB. And that'll open, and once that box is opened, the exploration, and not necessarily going back to how things are done in terms of releases and stuff like that, there will be some sort of strategy, Brian, that leads everybody over to Netflix, obviously, right? That has to be spoken of. And I think we're going to start seeing this trend of them putting out stuff in the theaters grow much more in the future.
I think so too. I do think it's interesting though, because they've greenlit stuff that would have bombed in the theater spectacularly too, right? So we actually, like, you think about like Gray Man or Red Notice, right? Like these are movies where Netflix got a huge amount of viewership on the streaming platform, but if you put that in the theater, that thing would not have made back the $250 million budgets that were off, right? You just know that. So I'd be very curious to see like how would they handle, okay, I'm going to spend a ton of money for a strictly streaming project over here, but I'm going to spend a ton of money for a project I really think can go, gangbusters theatrically over there. Like I'd be fascinated to see how they make those decisions in a way that other studios haven't in the past. But, and also they got to make amends. Like I know with the AMC theaters, AMC doesn't show any Netflix stuff that does go to theater because of the way Netflix has treated theaters, right? There's a lot of bridges they got to rebuild in order to credibly do what they're saying, right? Imagine like a Superman or a Batman movie that can't be shown on a single AMC screen across the country. That's no good. That doesn't work.
Which begs the question, do they start buying their own theaters?
They just buy AMC next then, right? And take care of that problem.
We've been talking about this for a long time already. That seems like the only move that makes sense for them to to do in order to be able to pull this off and to make profit at the theaters, right? Because there is money to be made at the theaters. But actually, we have said the theater experience shouldn't be the same if you're going to do this. We got to change it up. We got to change it up.
Sight Beyond Sight time, officially.
Sword of Omens, give me sight beyond sight.
Drum roll, please. Again, we said this is not should it happen. This is not should it not happen. There's no editorializing. This is a simply yes or no, will it happen? Based upon all this rumor mill and everything is happening as we're getting closer to the finish line, and the fact that James Gunn's existing DC contract is up on October 1st, of 2026. Yes or no, at this time next year when we're taping this show, will James Gunn be still running DCU?
That question to me, it all depends. That's how I'd answer that. It all depends on certain things. If it's me, James, you've done a great job at picking some of these projects. But some of your own projects, I don't know how you do it, but we can't continue doing it that way anymore. So if you want to continue running DC Studio, you can. But in terms of directing and writing, we don't need that. We'd like you to continue greenlighting projects, doing what it is you do to get these movies and shows done. But you have to, if you want to continue doing it, do it outside, like create other stuff for us, right? But not DCU. But at the same time, it's like, if you're doing and writing movies, even though how fast and he does them and directing, if you're doing that, you're not running DCU. You know what I'm saying? You're not thinking about DCU. You're thinking about your project that you're doing.
Yeah.
That's the choice. If that choice is not accepted, then no, he's not running DCU. Someone else is at that time. But we'll have to wait and see what sort of things change in his perspective, possibility in running DCU, because it all depends on what he wants to do and whether whomever owns it at the time believes in his ability to do so. But at the way he's doing it now, I wouldn't want him to do it the way he's doing it now.
So Pablo, officially, you're hedging a little bit here. So, and I nuanced the question. I did say at this time next year. I gave you a time because it's important. It's after. So a year from now would be after the contract deadline. But it might not be after the close of any merger that's happening. That might still be pending. So I do think that matters. But anyway, so your official answer is?
Nah, I don't think so. I don't think he'll be running DCU.
Yeah, my answer is no. Based upon everything. So based upon everything that's not a should he or shouldn't he. That's do I think he will be? I think the answer is no. I think it's increasingly no. And it's because of this storm that is brewing around content and what's in the content and the perception of what's in the content. And I stand by what I said. I think James Gunn made his Superman movie. I do think there was confusion about how political he intended it to be. You can go back to our shows, timing of his script submission versus the timing of the events in the Middle East. It does not line up that the movie's supposed to be a massive commentary on that, but that's what it became in the eyes of networks. That's what it became in the eyes of the White House. I mean, find the Superman poster with Trump's face on it at the time the movie came out. So when I see look at the avenues of outcomes, and again, I don't care what people are saying publicly. Again, I only focus on actions and what I see and then what's being reported as to what's really happening behind the scenes. If Paramount Skydance wins and we're being told the reason they have the inside track is they intend to move everything associated with HBO and Warner Brothers to the center right, to the right politically, DC will be part of that. And if Superman and DCU are perceived as being left or woke or too progressive, then that's going to move too, which means you're going to make changes. So I think if Paramount Skydance wins, James Gunn is out. The Saudi rumor, I think, is very remote, but let's be clear. That's the easiest one of this. If that's true and they're demanding full return of the Snyderverse, well, that means James Gunn is out. Like, full stop.
Yeah.
Netflix and Comcast is where it gets a little more interesting in the sense of if that one could be pending still this time next year. So maybe James Gunn gets another contract as part of that. Maybe that's ironically his best chance. But again, if the criteria for winning and getting over the finish line is, the company has to play ball in a certain way with Washington, then I think the only way that in that scenario, James Gunn really saves his job is if he commits to basically being like all of the writing, all of the projects, everyone in the writer's room is going to be positioning the projects a certain way. I don't think as a creator, he would ever actually agree to that. So therefore, I think the odds are very high at this point that at this time next year, we will be talking about someone else running the DCU. Whether we think that's the right decision or not, I think that's the reality we're headed toward.
AKA, he will have to bend the knee.
That's going to be a phrase you hear a lot, again, with regard to this. It is wild that we're having to have this kind of conversation and talk about things through this lens, but it is where we're at.
Yeah,
and I think if you pretend like it's not it's not happening, I don't think you're paying attention.
Exactly. It's like, okay, yeah. Again, we just got Superman. He's working on Man of Tomorrow. We got all these other stuff coming out. That's fine, but it's not that we're supposed to forget about what's happening surrounding these projects. That's important, and these things are happening. It's not rumor. These things are happening. The sale of WB is happening.
Yeah, and like it or not, the door has been left open by the commercial response to the projects. Right, that's the other content positioning or not. If Superman had made Avatar money, he'd be safe.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying, there's a level at which you get to call your shots. And, $1.5 billion, $2 billion for your first movie, you're winning a slew of Emmys for Peacemaker. If you're doing that type of stuff, I'm serious, but if you're doing that type of stuff, you get to walk around like De Niro with the bat in Untouchables, right?
Yeah.
But the door is open because that's not how it's played. Your stuff is either done okay to kind of been forgotten, and therefore you are vulnerable.
Yeah. Anything else, Brian, before we wrap this one up?
Two small ones. One is Lanterns being delayed to the end of the summer means we really don't get any DC content until Supergirl midway through the year. So it's all going to be kind of back end loaded now because you had Supergirl, Lanterns, and Clayface within kind of like a 4-month span. Late in the year. It's a little bit disappointing. Casey Bloys announced that as part of a discussion of what HBO had coming up.
Why do you think they delayed it? Did they say why they delayed it?
He didn't. He simply said, we're targeting end of summer to get this out. I would love to hear what's going on because they were in post-production. So I don't know that it didn't feel like it was a content-related move in the sense of they're not reshooting or doing anything like that. It's just tactically he seems to be thinking that's a better time, but it's a weird time because you're bringing it during summer movie season.
Do you think it has anything to do with how Supergirl plays out?
Well, I wondered about that in terms of connections to the story, whether there's a certain order they now need to follow that it makes more sense for Lanterns to come after Supergirl. I did wonder about that. I think it's a possibility, but we'll have to see. But it's a little disappointing. That means we get really no DC content until midway through the year. We had talked about putting it in the void, but let's put it here. Let's put the Chris Nolan thing here because we got to do it because we're talking about crazy stuff and what ifs and all this. So Chris Nolan, on starting to do a little promotional work for the Odyssey, confirmed something that I had not heard this specific rumor, but I think David Goyer, who wrote Batman Begins, had referenced this idea that Batman Begins was sort of not the original plan for Nolan on a podcast. Well, Chris Nolan confirmed that he was actually hired back in 2004 to direct Troy for Warner Brothers. A movie that had been developed by Wolfgang Petersen, who had directed Air Force One and Das Boot. But then Wolfgang Petersen wound up pitching and becoming enamored with a certain Batman versus Superman Public Enemies movie. And so initially, Chris Nolan was going to direct Troy, and Wolfgang Petersen was going to direct Batman versus Superman. And at the last minute, Warner Brothers canceled Batman versus Superman. Wolfgang Petersen, who had originally pitched and developed Troy, said, I want my movie back. And since he was the bigger deal director at the time, WB said, fine, you can go back and direct Troy. And here, Chris Nolan, why don't you have the scraps of Batman? And that became Batman Begins.
Wow.
Can you imagine we live in a world where Chris Nolan directed Troy and we got Batman versus Superman and the Dark Knight trilogy never happens?
It just tells me that he'd been thinking about Troy for a minute and wanting to do that. And now he gets his chance to do
the
whatever
Odyssey,
he
right?
wants.
He's been wanting this mythology thing. Yeah, for 20 years.
Yes.
But okay, so I just need to play this out for a second. How is the genre of superhero movies different if the Dark Knight trilogy never happens, but what probably would have been an ill-fated Batman versus Superman Public Enemies movie?
I don't think at that time, Brian, the success would have been likely more probable, I think, for Batman versus Superman at that time.
But this is Batman. The last Batman movie was Batman and Robin. And the last Superman movie had been Quest for Peace. So presumably, if this movie happens, you don't get Superman Returns, because that was 2 years later. And obviously, you don't get Batman Begins, Christian Bale, Heath Ledger. None of that happened.
I think that movie is big.
Oh, you think Batman vs. Superman still is like huge deal?
Public Enemies? Yes.
Still a huge deal. But then I think the genre is much worse off though, isn't it? Because like the Nolan trilogy was kind of seen as like a seminal moment that opened people's studios' eyes to how big these movies could be, because those are the first $1 billion superhero movies.
Yeah. But I think we probably still have Heath Ledger.
Interesting. Well, here's the other thing though. You probably never get the Snyderverse, because the Snyderverse, right, was the gritty Superman-led follow-up to the Nolan trilogy, and Nolan was kind of and Goyer were the people who produced and wrote Man of Steel. So if that doesn't happen, you don't get the Snyderverse either.
Yeah.
Like, who knows where they go after Batman versus Superman, whether it does well or not. It's a completely different world. And then the other question is Chris Nolan if he does that movie? And does it because the Dark Knight trilogy does take him to a place where he could start to direct and name his projects. Does Troy do the same thing for him? I think Troy probably would have been better.
Troy would have been better, but I think at some point, Chris Nolan is that good. I think at some point he still is who he is. I think that path is still the same in terms of his inevitability of being the guy to call his own shots and create the movies that he creates. I think he still is on that path towards greatness.
It's just wild to think, like, does he find Batman later in life? Because he does. It's just like, it's so
Probably
many things.
Not.
That's what I'm saying. Chris Nolan never directs a superhero movie. Like, it's just, maybe he directs a Bond movie instead, because that was always his dream, and the timing might have been better had he not been doing. To me, that's one of those like sliding doors moments where like Hollywood literally changed to its core because of that sequence.
How life goes. Yeah. Yeah, we discussed a lot on the DC Roundup today. Please let us know in the comment section below what you guys think of everything that we've discussed, man. Again, interesting things happening with the fate of DC and its movies. We got organizations changing their mind on certain things and approach on how they deliver content. And of course, it's a bit disappointing that Green Lanterns is being delayed, but I think there is the reason. It may be due to Supergirl's movie, Brian.
There's rumors that like Lanterns is going to have all this kind of, like, have some world building intergalactic stuff in it.
Perhaps they were looking at it, and they were seeing the connections and be like, this would be better off if we. It could be that. It could be that. And listen, once again, man. We're talking about this reset situation, even though it's early. We just got, Superman, and we still got 2026 to look at. But these things were already in the pipeline. They're not going to stop, obviously. But the question of whether James Gunn will be the guy sitting in the same chair a year from now, that's the question that we have to ask and talk about, because there are certain things happening in the background that will determine that.
Mm-hmm.
So it is what it is.
And the tide does not appear to be flowing in a direction that is favorable to him. Again, it's not about the merits of the work. It's more about the backdrop around everything associated with this deal. And that's why we're saying, will he or won't he? Now, we're no longer talking about should he or shouldn't he. We're saying, will he or won't he be in the chair?
And we're not talking about necessarily the reset of the DCU. We're talking about, will James Gunn be the guy behind all of that? And we're talking about it now. And if it comes to pass, we got to do the Barry Horowitz dance. We got to do the Barry Horowitz dance.
That is actually a really key point Pablo is making at the tail end here, which is that when we're asking this question, there is a lane now where you could see a path where they reset the whole thing, like we've talked about, go back to our shows. You probably do have a path open because of the landscape of approval here, where they could simply say, change the leadership of the DCU, change the tone of the future projects, but they're not going to hold David Cornsweet accountable. They're not going to hold Rachel Brosnahan. They could just continue with the characters and just say, well, now the characters are going to, we're going to change the tone of the project around that. That actually probably has more odds of happening now than it looked like kind of initially when this stuff was being talked about. So I think you bring up a really good point there of like, they might just demand the head of the snake and then say, yeah, you can keep going, but you got to keep going playing ball.
Yeah. So yeah, let us know in the comment section below what you guys think of all that we discussed. And remember, if you haven't heard it anywhere else, you heard it here first on the Nerd Gen Report.